We're talking today with Mr. Richard Bonge of Holland, Michigan. The interviewer is James Smither of Grand Valley State University. Mr. Bonge, can you start with a little bit of background? For instance, where and when were you born?
I was born right in the city of Holland, 372 West 21st Street, and after we got married, we lived on the same street, only a few blocks away from my birthplace, until we moved here about 5 years ago.
Okay. And when were you born?
1917, August 21.
All right. And what did your father do?
He was a worker in a shoe factory in Holland for 16 years, but then his health deteriorated and he was able to buy a farm southwest of Holland, not far out, in the village of Grafskop area. We lived there until I went in service in '42.
Okay.
We came there I think in 1926 we moved to the farm.
Okay. Now, when you're growing up in the 1930s, with the Depression going on and that kind of thing, how well did your family do then?
It was hard to work, hard scratching, as they say. But we had only a 40-acre farm and 2 horses, which perished in a barn fire a few years later, and all our cattle with it. We had 5 or 6 head of cattle and a few hogs. They got out alive, and a dog got out alive. That's all. We never knew what it started from, but the barn was a total loss.
Now, did your father have to take other work to help make ends meet?
Yes. He unloaded coal cars by hand with a scoop shovel, throwing it over the side of the boxcar a lot of times. Not a boxcar, but an open car. And he got 12, 13, 14 cents a ton.
Wow.
For unloading it.
All right. Now, did you finish high school?
I never got beyond the first half of the 10th grade.
Okay.
And I was the only one to flunk algebra 3 times in the first semester.
So what did you do after that?
Then during high school years, we had an address by a state trooper. And at that time, I kind of got the urge to become a policeman. But state police were out because I had no high school diploma. And the next best thing was I could run for a constable in the township where we lived when I was 21 years old. I did that, and nobody there knew anything about what the duties of a constable were. So I went to the library and looked up in the compiled laws of the state of Michigan, and I found out a lot of the background. The constable is a peace officer, and when I started to do some of those duties, my bondsman came over and said, "You better quit that. You haven't got any authority to do that." I said, "Well, I'll quit until I find out otherwise." And the justice of the peace and the prosecuting attorney both informed the other officers who were telling me I couldn't do that. Listen, he's got more authority than a deputy sheriff. He's been elected. You weren't.
Now, was there anyone running against you when you got elected?
No. But afterwards, then there were a lot of them. They won. So I had it only 1 year.
Okay. Now, what other kind of work were you doing at that time?
Helping on the farm. Okay. And I got enough money from my parents to buy a used tractor one time, a John Deere. And with that, I did our farm work, and I also had time enough to do some custom work. And I earned enough to put it on rubber, because it came on steel wheels. It was a 37 model tractor, an old one, but it gave good service. And I was doing that yet when I was drafted in 1942.
All right. Now, do you remember hearing about Pearl Harbor?
Yes. On a Sunday night, we heard it on the radio.
And when you heard the news, did you pretty quickly have the idea that you might wind up in the Army?
I had that right away. In fact, I called Ruth on that. I said, I think I might be drafted. My mother always said, no, they'll never draft you. You got asthma. I still have it, but they drafted me.
Okay. Now, did you have brothers?
I had one brother, 3 years older.
And was he staying on the farm, or did he go somewhere else?
No, he worked in a garage, an automobile place, and he was drafted and went in service a week after I did.
Okay. Now, so who is this Ruth person you mentioned? Is this your?
Yes, Ruth. I met her in 1938. And we had a few dates. She lived in Chicago and I lived in Michigan. It was her first trip to Michigan that she had the misfortune of meeting me.
So where did she meet you?
Right
Where? Yeah,
a mile from our hometown. She came with friends from Chicago that she had known all her life. She was 18 or 19. And I was just 20 or 21. But after a long time, we got married. We became engaged in 1942. She came to Lincoln, and that's where we were engaged.
Okay. Now that's getting a little bit ahead of ourselves in the story here,
Okay.
so we'll come back to that at that point. But basically, you already had a girlfriend, but she was over in Chicago most of the time.
Yes.
At this time. Now, before Pearl Harbor, had you been paying any attention to events in the world? Did you know there was a war in Europe and that kind of thing?
Oh yes, we knew that. We had a lot of that training in high school even. They had current events in the little newspaper, and it was in those about Hitler and a lot of that stuff.
Okay. Now, when you were learning about those things, or as the war got started in Europe, did you think that the United States would get involved in that?
I didn't know, but I thought it might.
All right. Now, after Pearl Harbor, you said how long was it before you were drafted?
Well, that happened in 41, I think.
Yeah, December 41. So what, you drafted, what, May of 42? Was that right?
May of 42.
Okay. Now, once you received your draft notice, what did you do?
Hoping that if I got drafted, because Ruth had promised she would write me if I had to go, I was kind of hoping to get in, but I didn't enlist. I thought I got to let God have his way, and if I'm drafted, okay. I didn't fight it in any way.
And then where did you go once you were drafted?
First of all, to St. Louis, Missouri, to camp, I've forgotten the name of it, Jefferson Barracks. And I was there for about 3 weeks. Then I was transferred to, I think, I got shipped out to Lincoln then.
Okay. And had you been at Fort Custer before you went out to?
Fort Custer first.
Yeah, and they
for just a week.
And what did you do when you were at Fort Custer?
Then I went to Jefferson Barracks, Missouri.
Okay. But what did they do at Fort Custer? Did you take tests or?
Yes, a few. Memorial Day came in there right after I was drafted. I had to go witness the parade, but I might not parade in it. We didn't know from Shinola.
Okay, so then they send you to Jefferson Barracks, and when you were at Jefferson Barracks, so what did they have you do there?
just some testing, physical testing, written testing, general background knowledge, all those things. And I think we went to the rifle range too. One day we'd get a turn at the pits and a turn at firing.
And had you fired guns before?
Yes, but never a high-powered rifle like these were.
All right.
And I remember an officer standing behind me and watching while I fired, I think 5 shots. He said, "Damn good shooting, soldier." I had 3 bullseyes, one close, and the first one was for targeting and setting the sights.
Right. Okay. Now, once they send you off to Lincoln, Nebraska, what were you doing there?
There I was sent to school, airplane mechanics school. And I was in the first class through that base. They were building hangars as fast as they could. And a hangar is a Quonset type building, but big enough to house an aircraft, a military aircraft.
I mean, a large bomber, a B-17, that kind of thing?
We didn't have any bombers there. It was a pursuit school, really. But we had to learn the basics of all of them. And I think it was a 7-week course. After that, on Armistice Day of '42, I was transferred to Chanute Field, Illinois, and I was given my first choice of a specialist school, which was propellers.
Okay. Why were you interested in that?
I always liked to work with windmills. I enjoyed making them. I understood the principles. And I asked for propellers. There were 4 specialist schools: power plants, propellers, instruments, and parachute rigging. But I preferred propellers, and I got it. I was the last one named of the class. He was going to Chanute Field.
Now, where in Illinois is Chanute Field?
Near 100 miles, roughly, near Champaign, Urbana.
Right.
You've heard of that.
Yes.
And roughly 100 miles south of Chicago. And in the meantime, we had become engaged, so I could spend every weekend, not weekend, but I could go there every day on my day off, because the top 10% of the class in grades got a pass that was available anytime he was off duty.
Well, that's a pretty good deal.
You didn't have to get any permission. Just go get your pass and take off.
So you couldn't do algebra, but you were getting good grades.
Right. I can't do it today.
All right. Now, with the kind of training that you were getting, basic mechanics school and propeller school, how much emphasis was there on discipline and drill and all of those sorts of things?
Not a whole lot, then, except on our break time and supper time. We had a march to the mess hall. There was no straggling. Straggling is separating from your group.
Right.
You had to be in a group.
Okay. Now, what kind of people did they have teaching you? What can you tell me about your instructors?
Some of them, the first instructor we had there, his favorite saying was, "Let's don't be for doing that." I think he was from the South. Somebody would have a wisecrack, "Well, let's don't be for doing that."
Now, were some of the instructors civilians or people who've been working in the air?
No, they were all military personnel.
Were there some who had been drafted or recruited out of the airplane industry or factories or anything like that? Okay, so they were all kind of regular Army types at that point. All right. Now, in propeller school, did things get more specialized? I mean, did you learn about the differences between working on multi-engine planes and single-engine planes and that kind of thing?
Well, we were working on the mechanism of the propeller.
Mm-hmm.
Propellers can change the pitch. You've heard of governors
Mm-hmm.
on farm tractors, maybe?
Can you describe that a little bit?
That's a device for controlling the speed. But on an aircraft, the governor controls the load of the propeller to regulate the speed of the engine.
Mm-hmm.
Because if it goes more, if the propeller tips travel at more than the speed of sound, they will shatter.
Mm-hmm.
So they have to keep the speed of the propeller in a safe range by increasing the pitch at low level. The more air it's pushing, the harder it is to turn the propeller.
Mm-hmm.
And if it goes off, it overspeeds. And when they overspeed, they make a shattering noise. It sounds like ripping a thin board
Mm-hmm.
edgewise, a tearing noise. And that's just before the propeller shatters.
Okay, so I take it you witnessed that then?
I did. Long after, in Brazil,
Mm-hmm.
I investigated a crash, or I didn't investigate it, but I knew what happened.
Mm-hmm.
One of the planes I heard taking off, all at once there was that shattering noise. And a short few seconds later, the air crash siren went off. And on the way down to the scene, a soldier was walking away from the plane. He says, "Hey, an airplane just crashed there." He bent down and picked up a propeller blade. He said, "Here's a blade from the propeller." So I knew that one flew apart.
Right. Okay. Now, about how big a base was it at Chanute at that point?
Oh, we had maybe 2,000 permanent personnel there.
Mm-hmm.
And transients, a lot of times well over 5,000. But they'd only be there for a night or two.
Mm-hmm. What kind of aircraft flew through there?
Bombers, transport planes. The largest bombers we had then were the B-17 and the B-24.
Right.
And in later 44, 45, then they got the first B-29s through.
Okay, so it was mostly multi-engine aircraft then that
They were
going
all multi-engine.
through. All right. Now,
No.
yeah.
No single engines came through.
Now, how long were you based at Chanute Field?
In Brazil,
No, at Chanute. How long were you there?
at Chanute,
Mm-hmm.
oh, I think 4 weeks. But during that time, I caught pneumonia,
Mm-hmm.
and I was in the hospital 5 weeks.
Okay. Once you recovered from that, then what happened?
Then I had to finish my last 2 weeks of school
Okay. And once you finished school, then where did they send you?
to Dallas, Texas, to Love Field. I was assigned to the 5th Ferries Command, to the 62nd Ferry Squadron,
Mm-hmm.
like his name, Ferry.
Right.
That was during the time of Ferry Command yet,
So you're transporting your aircraft.
to Britain.
Okay.
They flew them, Roosevelt engineered that, and I guess it was very good that he did. I always had a bad opinion of him for a long time, until I learned more of what he knew and we didn't. That's why he was trying to help England so much.
So this was something, a service then that he had started before Pearl Harbor then to
Yes,
get aircraft over
yes.
there. Okay. Of course, by the time you're in there, we're at war and we're allies with the British and so forth. Now, Were you servicing planes then that were being sent overseas? Was that your...
No, I never did any of that.
Mm-hmm.
Because after I got to Texas, to Love Field,
Mm-hmm.
I was assigned to the Ferry Squadron, but they put me on detached service to the Guard Squadron.
Okay.
And after 2 weeks, I said, this isn't the MPs. I asked for that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's too late, you're on a shipping list. So we ended up in Florida,
Mm-hmm.
in the middle of the night with dim blackout lights.
Mm-hmm.
And the next morning they told us we had all been transferred to the Corps of Military Police.
Okay.
5 different companies. And we stayed there a month.
Were you training there or just...
Boca Raton, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Go
Yeah.
training and biding our time,
Mm-hmm.
waiting for orders. And then one night we had been told that 10% of our company was going to get furloughs at a time. I was highly hopeful, maybe I'll get a chance. And then they said, hey Bonge, did you turn in your stuff? Turn it in? Why? You're getting transferred. You're going to 1208. No. Yeah. And the next day we shipped out.
So that's a 1208th Military Police Company
Yes.
then? All right, and where did they ship you to?
To New Orleans. And after 1 week, the first Friday night after Easter in 42, in 43,
yeah.
I got on a boat in New Orleans.
What kind of boat was it?
It was an old fruit carrier, belonged to the United Fruit Company.
Mm-hmm.
The name was the Algonquin, and down in the hold, and one of the sergeants in my company had gone to France in World War II, World War I,
yeah.
on that boat.
Mm-hmm.
But it took us to Cuba, Guantanamo Bay.
Mm-hmm.
We spent 6 days in the harbor at Guantanamo,
Just sitting on the boat?
just sitting on the boat. Officers, some of them could go ashore, we couldn't.
Mm-hmm.
We could throw quarters over the side and watch these kids with no swimming suits. They'd come up, dive down as they saw the coin coming, and they'd beat it to the bottom, come up with it in their teeth, and waving, throw some more. That was the only excitement we had.
Mm-hmm. All right, and where did you go next?
Then we went on the same boat to Trinidad. There we got off, and I stayed there a month at Fort Reed. Walter Field was there, an Air Force field,
Mm-hmm.
but they sent us to Fort Reed, which was further inland. And there we were just doing training. Nobody knows why.
Mm-hmm. But what were you training for?
Well, just close order drill, mechanics of arrest,
Mm-hmm.
whatever the officers could think of to keep you busy. Swinging across an arroyo where there was a creek in the bottom on a rope or a vine, running, playing baseball maybe. Just whatever they could think of to keep us busy. And then we got orders to ship out again. Then we got on a much larger ship. That was the General Clem. And I often wondered who it was named for.
Mm-hmm.
Clem was a Michigan volunteer who rose to the rank of general in the Civil War and wanted to re-enlist in World War II, but he was too old.
Well, World War II or World War I maybe. I'm not sure he'd still be around for World War II. But anyway,
Yes, he was still living.
okay. So they ship you down. Now, did your ship sail in convoy or did it go by itself?
Convoys, yes.
Were there...
The sub-chasers, we thought they were sub-chasers, but I learned here, the man who came out of the elevator when we went in the elevator was an officer on a destroyer escort during the war. And that's what those were. They were 300 feet long.
Right.
They drew 10 feet of water. Well, he served on a destroyer escort all the time. But we could see them at a distance, going up and down, out of sight, back in, on the waves. And our convoy was maybe 15, 20 ships. Could never count them because they were over the horizon both ways.
Did you have any U-boat scares?
One time they were dropping depth charges. We could see the air bursts, the foam, and see them going around in circles. But whether they got them or not, we heard one time that one of our ships got torpedoed during the night. Never knew.
Okay. About how long did it take you to get where you were going?
14 days on the second ship, 21 on the first.
Okay. And where did they land you?
At the harbor in Natal, Brazil.
Okay. And why were you sent to Natal?
That, too, is a mystery to me.
Well, what was there?
Just this Air Transport Command base.
Right.
And it was in the early stages of being built. I thought of it during the night. My first ride out from the city of Natal to the air base, which was maybe 5 or 6 miles outside the city limits, there were all saplings, no leaves on them, just sapling, sharpened on the ends. They were afraid of parachute landings, that the Germans might put paratroopers in there. But if they came down on a sapling that was sharpened, it wouldn't be pleasant.
Right.
But the fields, they were sandy fields. It looked like all clear ground from the air, but there was a mess down on the ground.
Did they have to build hard surfaces or corduroy them or something?
Yes, they had tar roads there.
And did they build runways then like that? Or
Yes, they were building runways, mile long. We had 2 of them in the form of an X because you have the trade winds there. And I only knew them to blow from the other way one time. I thought a plane was coming in on an emergency landing. He was coming the wrong way. But I came past the aerodrome and I saw the sock was pointing the other way. And I heard it thunder one time in 25 months there.
Okay, so you did not have hurricanes or things like that while you were
In
there.
Trinidad, it could thunder every few minutes and pour. And 5 minutes later, your clothes would be dry.
But Natal was far enough south that the weather pattern was different and...
It was just hot.
Okay. Now, what were we using the air base for? What was its purpose?
Air Transport Command. Things that were going to Europe, to the Far East, to China, to North Africa, all went by air through Natal, because from Natal, Brazil, there's a bulge in the Atlantic there. From Natal out to Ascension Island, in roughly the middle of the Atlantic, there was an emergency landing field.
Right.
And then they could refuel and fly to Dakar, North Africa, or Agra, India, or if they had a lot of fuel capacity and a high ceiling, they could go over the hump, the Himalaya Mountains, into China and Burma.
Okay. So you're kind of the main staging area to go in a lot of different directions.
Yes.
And maybe better weather doing it than if you went up to Newfoundland and
Yes.
went to England that way.
Very much better weather. The Azores route was fog-bound a lot of part of the year, but fog never bothered there.
Okay. Now, what was the countryside like in the area around Natal? I mean, was it forest? Was it farmland?
Very, very poorly populated, and the people are very poor there. I talked to a mason once. He did brickwork, mortar work, and I asked him what he earned. 15 cents a day.
What were you earning as a soldier then?
$50 a day, once a week, once a month. I got in just under that raise. A day or two before, it was $30 a week once a month. But then when I got in, but shortly after I was in Brazil, then I got promotions, and before long I was a staff sergeant, and I worked as commander of the guard.
Okay. Now, what kind of duties did you have? What did the MPs have to do there at that base?
It was ground security for the air base. They had, my company had another half that worked town patrol.
And what did town patrol do?
Keep order amongst the soldiers that were on leave, or any crew members from ships that happened to come in. If they were flying the American flag, they were under American military police jurisdiction.
Now, about how big a town was Natal?
Oh, it was a very poor town. And it's a lot larger right now, because I met a young lady there whose grandfather was an aircraft bigwig before the war in Europe. He was Portuguese. And the air base that is there now, an international air base, is named for her grandfather. It's the Augusto Severo International Airport.
Okay. But at the time, then, you said it's very...
At the time, it was very poor, very poor.
Now, what was there for soldiers or sailors to do there?
Whorehouses, beer establishments, and that's about it. There was a USO later, but I rarely went there. I'd go downtown on my day off and wander the stores. You could buy silk stockings for one. I sent Ruth a lot of them. You couldn't get them anywhere here in America.
Right.
And a lot of little things. She's got a couple of vases yet that I bought. But no, there was very little to spend your money on.
Now, did you ever get assigned to town patrol, or did you pretty much stay as a space guard?
I was never on town patrol at all until the last 3 months that I was in Brazil. Then I was at a different base, and there I was in charge of town patrol. But we only had to go down at noon and stay until about 11 at night. Then we were done.
Were you supposed to make sure everybody was leaving by then?
The enlisted men were all out of town. But that was a much nicer town. That was São Luís do Maranhão, close to the Amazon.
Right.
And there we also had to be on blimp duty one week at a time,
Blimp duty? What's that?
landing the blimp. The Navy had a blimp there,
Mm-hmm.
a lighter than aircraft.
Right.
And when they come in for the evening, they drop a landing cord, and the landing crew has to grab a hold of that cord, a couple of guys on each side, to pull it down. And excuse me a minute, did you want to use the stove,
I
Mildred?
want to use the oven. I'll be real quiet.
Okay, go ahead.
You can start it, go ahead.
Darn, I was thinking you were looking at me.
All right, so you're the blimp duty
We were
part.
just responsible, I was responsible for getting the crew out there at the right time, morning and night. Morning to let them off, and evening to get them back in.
Mm-hmm.
And that was all I had to do for
All right.
that week.
Okay. Well, let's go back then to Natal. What kinds of things did you have to watch for or worry about when you were on base security?
People going over the fence to an off-limits village.
Mm-hmm.
You could get everything from getting killed to venereal diseases.
Mm-hmm.
And one night we had men going over by droves because North Africa was closed. They had a malaria outbreak there. And they wouldn't let any come in from Natal, so they were backing up at Natal.
Mm-hmm.
We had men sleeping under the wings of planes, and all the barracks were filled. And we put a foot patrol in the village. And one night, I and another MP were walking down the road, and there were figures sitting on the edge of the road. We didn't know what they were. Nobody was talking. One of the figures on the side says, "You guys going back already?" "Yeah, fall in." Fall in is a military command, but fall in, he said. Well, we might as well. We threw our raincoats off. We're military police and you're under arrest.
Mm-hmm. Now, did you have people who resisted arrest? Were there people who didn't want to come?
Yes. One time I found the Navy base commanders. The Navy had an anti-submarine patrol base at Natal,
Mm-hmm.
but just a few men. And the Navy base commander's car was out in front of one of these houses. And when the guy came out, I said something about, "You're under arrest for stealing the car and no pass." "Well, guy, I hope you didn't think I took it." "Well," I said, "you must have gotten it here." I said, "Get in the car." And I thought to myself, if he's going to run, he'll do it now. And
Mm-hmm.
just as quick as he was on the other side of the car, boom, 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 he was running as fast as he could go.
Mm-hmm.
And I yelled at him to halt, and then I fired a shot where I thought he was, and boom, he hit the ground. And man, my heart was almost breaking the knot of my tie.
Mm-hmm.
We had to wear a necktie day and night. I said, "Where'd you get hit?" He said, "I didn't, it was a barbed wire." He stumbled over barbed wire at the instant.
Mm-hmm.
Was I glad. But then later in the Navy office where I took him, he tried to hit me over the head with one of those big flit guns, about 4 or 5 feet long.
Mm-hmm.
And he came up behind me, and the Navy OOD caught him, took it away from him. He was later found guilty, and the commanding officer asked if I would take him along, because he said, I want him to work.
Mm-hmm.
He got sentenced to 10 days for resisting arrest,
Mm-hmm.
assaulting a superior, and they gave him 10 days.
I guess otherwise maybe that might be a good way to get out of an assignment you didn't like, make trouble, and they send you somewhere else. Well, so did you take him? Did you put him to work?
Oh yeah, he had to work a couple of days, but that's all on the garbage detail
Mm-hmm.
with the others.
Now, you mentioned earlier the period there when North Africa was under quarantine and all the men were backed up on the base. How long did that last?
The what?
When North Africa was under quarantine with malaria?
2 weeks about.
Okay. And did that kind of thing only happen once, or did you get other sorts of delays?
No, they were shut down then because of malaria,
Mhm.
but then they got it under control, and then they opened the base up again. And then we could get rid of the people.
Okay. How much contact did you have with the local population in the area?
Quite a bit, I guess, because I learned a lot of Portuguese there. I can still speak some of it, but not very much. I can tell you that how long I stayed there, from Julio 4, 1942 until November quarta-feira.
Well, 42 would have been 42. You'd probably be 43, though.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I left there in 45.
Right. And you got there in 43. Okay. Well, anyway, what kinds of people did you deal with in terms of the civilian population? Did you have local officials or workers or?
Hardly any officials.
Mm-hmm.
Hardly any that we had to deal with.
Mm-hmm. It's okay. It's been there all. Did you have civilians working on the base for you?
There were a lot of Brazilians that worked on
Mhm.
the base, yes, in
What-
the mess hall
Mhm.
and in the laundry. One time I was called to an accident that happened off the base, but it was a 6x6 truck that was hauling these transient workers
Mm-hmm.
back home. And I could track them it was a gravel road, but you know what a washboard is?
Mm-hmm.
All right. He had been driving too fast, and he switched once or twice and then rolled.
Mm-hmm.
And it was an open top truck. And the driver was long gone. The only thing anybody could tell you was he went in the jungle.
Mm-hmm.
But there were a lot of people. I got the tailgate open and got it propped open, and then I crawled under there on my belly and tried to get to all the bodies to check if there was any alive.
Mm-hmm.
I would have scooped out a place by hand for them to breathe, but
Mm-hmm.
I didn't find any.
About how many do you think were on that truck?
Probably 25 or 30. Some of them got off, but
Mm-hmm.
I never knew the outcome of it. But one of the men who worked in the orderly room had always asked, every time he'd see me, if I was working, hey, you ever get to go on an accident call?
Mm-hmm.
Give me a ride along, I'd like to see that.
Mm-hmm.
He said, I don't ever want to go again.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, you mentioned earlier talking about the propellers and so forth, that there had been a plane crash because of propellers. Were there other crashes or accidents or things that you had to
Oh
deal with?
yes, we had, I would say, one a week.
Mm-hmm.
And usually everybody was killed. One time there was a crash, we heard the sirens, and I was quite a ways away from the airfield, and we went as fast as we could out to where there was a little bit of a fire burning, and that was a B-29, no, not a 29, this was a B-24,
Mm-hmm.
but he had ammunition on, and the whole plane was engulfed in flames. And we couldn't see anyone moving, and we couldn't get at it
Mm-hmm.
because of the heat.
Right.
So I laid down under a slight rise, and I tried shooting at the wing edge. I thought if I can get some of the fuel to drip out,
Mm-hmm.
that'll prevent an explosion maybe. And then a few minutes later, the officer of the day came, found me. He said, what are you shooting at, Bonge? I said, the leading edge of the wing. So he joined me. And then a few minutes later, we had an airdrome patrol
Mm-hmm.
riding around. He came by us. He says, I was here when it went down. And he said, I got them all loaded up and took them to the hospital.
Mm-hmm.
That's why there was nobody around. But what a good feeling.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, you mentioned before we started the interview that there was at least one occasion where you knew something about someone who got killed on a particular plane or had a family connection or someone your wife knew.
That was a B-29
Mm-hmm.
that crashed. And we couldn't find the scene for a long time, and when we did see it, we couldn't get to it. There were no roads,
Mm-hmm.
and there's a lot of swamp. But the officer that I was riding with in a Jeep said, don't let anybody pass here except fire and ambulance people.
Mm-hmm.
And two guys came on, and they just kept on walking. I said, you can't go there.
Mm-hmm.
They kept on going. And I pulled my gun and I says, halt again sharply. And then finally they stopped when they heard me
Mm-hmm.
pull the receiver back and let her fly.
Mm-hmm.
Well, this is Colonel Snyder. Post is off the base, so he's really the commanding officer.
Mm-hmm.
He said, well, why didn't you tell me? And I told the officer that had brought me there in
Mhm.
the first place, he was the provost marshal.
Mm-hmm.
He says, you won't hear anything about it. And if you do, he says, I'll take care of them.
Mm-hmm. Because you were following orders and they were following
I
procedure.
didn't hear anything,
Mm-hmm.
but I think we taught him a lesson.
Now, did you know somebody who was on that plane? Was that?
Oh, that was the B-29?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Ruth was working at the EJ&E Railroad office in Chicago. And a friend of hers who lived in southern Illinois went home for a weekend. And she came back the next week with a story that her mother knew a lady who had gotten a telegram from the War Department. Your son was killed somewhere in South America.
Mm-hmm.
And Ruth remembered that I had written her, you didn't get a letter yesterday. I used to write every day.
Mm-hmm.
I had to work all night. She was thinking, could that have been a plane crash?
Mm-hmm.
And if so, was there anybody by the name of Heinzelman
Mm-hmm.
killed in it? And I looked that up, and there was. And I had been at the funeral.
Mm-hmm.
I was in the honor guard, the color bearer, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
But it was an hour-long service. There were 4 chaplains, I think, all had their say. And there were 10 killed, I guess,
Mhm.
9 or 10. One survived, and he was still in the hospital in Florida, the last I heard.
Mm-hmm.
But that was the one. And then shortly after that, we got married, and this lady asked me if I would take pictures of the grave.
Mm-hmm.
And if I survived, would I come and see her after the war?
Mm-hmm.
So we went there after we were married. I was on temporary duty then.
Okay. Now, when did you get married?
October 10, 1945. And I was discharged a good month later,
Mm-hmm.
the 14th or 15th of November.
Now, where were you married?
Pardon?
Where were you married?
In Evergreen Park, Illinois.
Okay. And so basically, you were there, and did you go back to Brazil then after that?
No,
Okay.
no, we never did.
Mm-hmm.
But I used to feel so much pity for the people that were getting buried,
Mm-hmm.
and their relatives probably never knew what happened.
Mm-hmm.
And in this one case, that's all I knew. But I was able to do that anyway.
Mm-hmm. Now, are there other events from your time down in Brazil that kind of stick in your memory, or stories that sort of stay with you or come back to you?
Oh yes. A lot of times at night I think of them.
Can you think of any now?
Yes.
Can you share any of them?
I called one fellow up the other day who served with me a long time. He would be my sergeant of the guard.
Mm-hmm.
The commander of the guard was in control of the whole unit that
Mhm.
worked 24 hours.
Right.
And the sergeant of the guard was under the commander of the guard. He
Mhm.
worked 24 hours too.
Mm-hmm.
This one lives in Georgia. He's a little bit older than I am,
Mm-hmm.
Herbert Broom. And something happened just recently in or near Rome, Georgia. Well, this man doesn't live at Rome, but I says, called him up, said somebody that lives here, a warm friend with us, told me something happened in Rome or the near there,
Mm-hmm.
but he forgot what. Oh, he says, I had a birthday. He says, I was 91 yesterday. I said, I know you're a little older than I am, but you don't need to rub it in.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, he said, there was a tornado. It came over their house and came down right after it passed over their house.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't hurt their house a bit. But he said it took about 300 houses or trees out beyond their house. That had happened just lately.
Okay.
But he was always on town patrol, this
Mhm.
Broom. And one time he got in a fight with a drunken sailor that they arrested for being drunk. And he had the nipple bitten off his,
Ugh.
hanging by a shred.
Mm-hmm.
He said, boy, that got me mad. They sewed it back on.
Do you have a story about having to testify against a commanding officer?
Yes,
Okay. So what was that?
one night, probably 1:30 in the morning, the dance guy stood by my bunk. Bonge, they'd like to have you work for intelligence. Well, just if you hear anything of people in the unit that are discontented, sometimes they've been here so long.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to do it, let a certain officer know. And that's all. Well, I kept thinking, I don't hear anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think there's any discontent here. But I lived in a group of maybe 6 men, and 3 or 4 of them worked in the orderly room. So then I started to hear them talking about something. And I just listened, I never questioned anything. And it came out that the commanding officer of our company had a .30 caliber carbine, that's the short
Mm-hmm.
of the military rifle,
Right.
wrapped up. He was going to send that home. It was
Mm-hmm.
marked, bona fide gift from a serviceman,
Mm-hmm.
duty free,
Right.
and part of it had gone through already, but another part was standing behind his desk. This all came out bit by bit.
Mm-hmm.
And then one day the commanding officer, I turned some of the information in when I got it, and as I got it, I told him more. The intelligence officer came in there and looked around, and then he says, "What's that package behind your desk there? None of your business." "Oh," he said, "I want to know what it is. You get out of here or I'll throw you out." So he went out, he got the colonel, the
Mhm.
base commander, and came back a little later. The base commander said, "Follow me, Lieutenant Glass." I went to inspect the area. And the intelligence officer stayed back, but the package was gone.
Mm-hmm.
Well, a few days later, it came out when he had left the other day, when the commanding officer told him to get out. He had called one of the sergeants who was, I knew, a buddy of his. "Take that thing and bury it in the supply room." Well, they got it back, and they called Miami, Florida. The postmaster there stopped the one article that was gone through and sent it back. That had the rest of the mechanism. And then they had a court martial. And he pleaded not guilty, but he was convicted.
Mm-hmm.
And then the post commander made him plans and training officer. Well, then more evidence came out. They were telling me about a lot of other stuff that he had sent
Mm-hmm.
earlier. So I put that on the report, and I suggested maybe they could have the FBI search his parents' house and his wife's house. And they found a lot more.
Mm-hmm.
And then the day I was getting transferred to the other air base where I had to help land the blimp,
Mm-hmm.
then the first sergeant of my company, the old company, came and saw me at the passenger station where I was waiting for the plane. "Hey, Bonge," he says, "I thought you'd like to know. They're giving Glass another court-martial."
Mm-hmm.
He was going to resign, but they said, "You can't resign. You got to take a court-martial, and else just charge him and we'll put him on trial."
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, let's see. Actually, we're at a point where this tape is just. Okay. Let's see. Well, I guess one other miscellaneous question. When you're kind of down there in Brazil, was that an area where there were a lot of tropical diseases or things like that, or was it fairly?
Yes.
What kinds of things affected the men there?
We saw a lot of people that were deformed, holes in their legs sometimes. You know, a deep scar.
Right.
And I've never seen them, but I've heard them tell of it a lot of times, that there was a man who had elephantiasis or something like that. He had his
So the local population would have had
a
diseases that
little
weren't treated. Yeah.
wheelbarrow in front of him that his penis rested on.
But the soldiers on the base, were they mostly in good shape? Could they keep them
Yes.
healthy? Okay. So it wasn't like some of the Pacific Islands or some of these other places where everybody got malaria or jungle rot or anything else like that.
A lot of them could, but we had to sleep first few nights, I guess, under malaria nets, mosquito nets,
Yeah.
rather. We were 2 weeks. We were in a transient barracks, and there we had to be under a mosquito net. And at night, somebody pull up the skirt of the tent. Hey, Joe, want to buy a watch?
Now, once your service down in Natal was over, you were able to come back up to the States, get married. At that point, what kind of work did you go into?
I worked for my brother, who had a wheel alignment shop before time,
Go down and get some coffee.
and he had said if I didn't have anything else in mind, I could work for him. He'd send me to school to learn alignment of automobiles, and he'd give me a job. So that's what I did for about 3 years.
And what happened after that?
Then his business went down. We did brake work after that too, and radiator repairing. And then I got on the Holland Police Department.
And how long did you stay with them?
15 years.
Okay.
But then it seemed like I was always getting assigned to family fights and never send an extra officer with you. And there were a lot of officers that got killed recently in those years. And I finally decided it was no longer for me. And I quit.
And what did you do after that?
I worked 14 years at General Electric. There I had to retire because of arthritis in my spine, and that was making my arms go to sleep at night. No matter what I did, that was the only reason they could find for it. They said arthritis in your upper spine.
Okay. And to look back on the whole thing now, how do you think your time in the service sort of affected you in terms of how you look at the world or anything else?
Well, I have always believed, and I still do, that God is in control of everything. But it's not getting any better. And that's not God's fault. But the world is getting worse. The people in it are getting worse. And that includes me too. I'm one of the people.
And how is that something that's sort of a product of your time in the service, or what does that have to do with that impression or that idea?
Nothing really.
Okay. Because I was kind of curious about how do you think the time in the service affected you? Did you kind of, your view of the world change at all at that time, or do you think you grew up any there or anything else like that?
Yes, I think nowadays we don't think so much of saving things. Years ago we did. for instance, here in the Warm Friend, they've just recently tried to recycle some things. There's very little cooperation on that fact. Newspapers, for one, were a big item. For a while, they were putting them all on a shelf in the laundry room.
Mm-hmm.
They could just as well bring them downstairs. They'd still get taken care of, but there's some that will not do it.
All right then. Anything else you want to add to the record here before we close out the interview?
No, I don't really have anything, but if you have questions, shoot.
No, I think you pretty much took care of mine.
Yep.
Okay, all right. Well, thank you very much for talking to me today.
You're very welcome.
All right, that's a wrap.